Hello class, good morning. This is RC again and welcome to another session of RC's Research Corner. So in the previous sessions, we have discussed that traditionally or in the Germanic format, there are different parts or chapters of a research paper. And actually, whether you use IMRAD or the Germanic format, you basically have to understand that these are just differences in the format, but the overall processes, the contents are more or less similar. We have to go through the same process actually. So you also have to read through about the literature, and it's just a matter of presentation. But for the first chapter or for the first part, let's focus on the problem. So for some people, they want to call this as introduction. For some authors, they want to prefer or they want to use the term the problem. Or for some authors, they also coin the term the problem and its background. And it's actually, it depends on in terms of its function. Kasi when we talk about research, the format is actually fluid. So, um, the format of one university might differ from the format of the other university. But for our case, we will just call this as the problem and its background, or introduction. That should be fine. So this part of the chapter actually begins with stating the problem. How much or how must a research problem be introduced in the paper? Okay, so the first chapter of the paper must contain the following parts. Okay, so we have the introduction, chapter 1, which would cover the background of the study, the statement of the problem, the objectives of the study, the hypothesis of the study, the significance of the study, the scope, and the delimitation of the study. Essentially, the statement of the problem and objectives of the study are the same. So, but we will be discussing these parts in greater detail as we move along with our discussions. So what is the background of the study? So the background of the study basically introduces the important points that establish where the study revolves. So it is simply telling us what the problem is, right? So what are the current solutions to the problem? Are these solutions working? And what are the things that needs to be done? So this may include, it depends on the style, this may include a description of the study or the history involving the research. So the researcher must argue or must present that the study is significant and it warrants a study. So how would a researcher do that, right? That is by briefly describing how you intend to go about the study. Are you going to conduct an experiment, conduct a survey, right? So how many when writing the background of the study, how many pages must this include? So this section is typically around 1 to 2 pages by convention. And when writing the introduction or the background of the study portion of the introduction, I think for several papers that I have read, this is one of the most efficient one. So the first one is to identify the current state of the field. What is the problem all about? You have to first introduce what the problem is. And the second one is that you need to discuss or explain what are the current practices to address the issue or the problem. Are there current solutions to the problems or to the problem rather? Are these solutions working or not? If not, right, what has been studied? What is the research gap? What is missing in the existing literature, in the existing body of knowledge? So it is important for us to understand or to mention that there is a research gap because your study will be used to contribute what is missing in the field of knowledge, or I mean what is missing in the knowledge gap. So To make your paper unique, you need to present this in such a way that your paper contributes to filling in the gap, to bridging rather the research gap. So in our presentations later on, I want you to be able to at least cover four of these parts. The first one, again, is the current state of the field or what the problem is. What are the current practices to address the issue? What is the research gap? And what is the contribution of your study to address the research gap? Okay, so let's have some short activities on, or actually we are going to have this short activity to help us identify or to give us a snapshot of how background of the study would look like. Okay, so let's pause for a minute. I'm going to give you some time to read this. Okay, or I'll give you 2 minutes to read this. And in your notebook, I want you to identify those four parts earlier. Okay? Okay. Yes. So now, let us try to identify or check your answers if you were able to accurately identify the four subparts of the background of the study. Okay. Yes. So the green, this part here is actually the problem. Okay, so what is the problem? Many forms of instruction, both traditional and alternative, have been introduced to develop um, students' mathematical skills. So the current solution or the current practice is that one approach that continues to be widely used in Asia is Singapore math. Though many studies have attempted to differentiate its effectiveness, there remains a dearth of empirical studies that have investigated the effectiveness of Singapore math in the Philippines, right? So there is a gap. Studies have been limited abroad, and according to Corpus, there is a need to evaluate this whether this method or this practice is also effective in the context of Filipino learners. So, because of that kind of gap, we need to conduct a research study. So, in this part, the author says that following that suggestion, this study investigated the effects of Singapore math on developing the mathematical logical skills of Filipino students in selected public schools in the Philippines. Okay. So that is now a sample of how we write the background of the study. Okay, so this time I have shared with you, yes, actually yesterday, I have shared with you a file or a paragraph for you to take a look at. Okay, so I hope that you have read the file, and similar to what we had earlier, I want you to identify the different parts of the background of the study using the sample that we had earlier. This time, we are going to use this study as a reference. This study is entitled Student Social Media Usage and Their Attention Span in Class. Okay, so I have given this one to you. You may also read this. I'll give you a minute to read this again, to review, or for you to be able to read this. Okay, this is the next slide or the next part. So if you were able to open this yesterday, I'm sure that you're already familiar with this. Okay, so now let's try to take a look at this one.